Hi guys, welcome back to Dark Vaults. If you are new here, we cover Irish true crime. If you're not new, welcome back and thank you as always for watching. We're just going to get straight into today's case. It is a solved one and it is a murder case. Just a trigger warning that there is going to be talk of SA and things of that nature. Also, I have to apologise because I cannot find a photo of our main victim, of any of the victims really, but we have photos of the culprit. Dolores Lynch was born on the 10th of February 1948, the second eldest of four girls. They would live in 15 Hammond Street in Blackpits in Dublin city centre. She would go to Warrenmount but left school at 14 and then went to work in a factory with her mum but would later go on to be a chambermaid in the Montrose Hotel. It is reported that Dolores and her father had, quote, an incestuous affair where she would become pregnant and sadly the baby would be stillborn. There's a lot to unpack in that because a child cannot enter into an affair. I would also argue then that a parent is in a position of power, so again, cannot enter into an affair because her dad has a power, there's a power dynamic there. We all know that that wasn't an affair. He was abusing his daughter. Just need that to be clear on the record. After this horrific and traumatic event, Dolores would leave the family home and to support herself, she would become a prostitute. Between 1966 and 1979, Dolores would rack up 20 convictions. These would be for prostitution, housebreaking and larceny. Despite Dolores' career, she was still quite a devout Catholic. She would be one of the few who would go and say the rosary at the Legion of Mary house. So I'm pretty sure I've mentioned that before in the Honor Bright video. You know, it's somewhere kind of like that for fallen women and wayward women to go, one of these kind of services. Dolores would also go on trips to Lourdes, and she also went to the Vatican where she had an audience with the Pope. In 1980, she would quit this life and get a job as a wardsmaid in St. James's Hospital. She would also be quite active in like the feminist movement, so she would attend a lot of women's marches and I want to read this to you actually. So in 1978 a different ex-prostitute, Teresa Maguire, had been raped and murdered, and Dolores would essentially write a letter to the Minister for Justice at the time, Jerry Collins, and basically asking for changes in the law relating to prostitution. The girls who make their living on the streets of Dublin are very annoyed and disappointed that you have refused to meet us in the company of the Council for the Status of Women to hear our point of view about the injustice we suffer in the courts. So Dolores seemed to have, taken a turn in her life and having a more stable life. So she actually moved back into the family home. At this point her dad is not there, so I don't know if he's gone or if he has died or what's the story. But she now lives with her mum and her aunt in 15 Hammond Lane. But before all this, Dolores crossed paths with the wrong person. At midnight on the 11th of May 1976, Dolores and three other prostitutes were sitting in KFC on Bagot Street. Two men would come into KFC. One would go over to them and ask did they know where the cigarette machine was. They said up the counter. And so he went up there and he also got a can of 7-Up. At this point, the other man blocked the front door. Dolores would go on to make a statement to Gardaí, and so that's what I'm going to read to you now. He turned to me and without warning hit me on the head with the can of 7-Up. He then asked if I knew him. I did not answer him and he hit me again with the can. I then said I did not know him. He then kicked me in the tummy and I doubled up. He kicked me in the eye and the chest. He continued to hit me with the can until he drew blood. He also turned me around to face the other man and said, if you know him on Friday, you'll get it. The other man at this point said, you will be dead. He kicked me and hit me several more times. Before he left, he said again, if I went to court on Friday, that I would be killed stone dead. Then they left and remained outside for 20 minutes. We had to stay until some customer came into the restaurant before we could get out of the place, as we were scared to leave. Dolores would have to be brought to St. Vincent's Hospital and receive 10 stitches for her head. The man who came in and attacked her, his name is John Cullen. And the other man was someone who had assaulted another prostitute and she was witness, so she was going to testify. And so obviously this was an intimidation tactic to stop her from testifying against that attack. John Cullen was born on the 30th of October 1950 in Drimnagh. He would leave school at 14 and rack up convictions from the age of 10. He was married with 3 kids and lived in Kilbarrack, but that was where the family man image ended. John Cullen was a pimp and he terrorised his girls. He used strong arm tactics and took 80% of their earnings. And he obviously thought these tactics would scare Dolores. But Dolores not only testified against that man, and he received 18 months in prison, she testified against John Cullen attacking her. And on the 6th of December 1976, he was sentenced to 3 years. He spent these years seething with anger for Dolores, plotting his revenge. While in prison, he viciously beat a prison officer. He made no secret of the fact that he hated Dolores and would often tell people, including his lover/employee, Lynn Madden, who was a friend of Dolores's. Elizabeth Lynn Madden was born in Cork in 1944. At the age of 7, her parents split and she moved with her mum to England. What happened here is kind of iffy. It said that they didn't get on. I did hear that she had been left in a convent. However, she is no longer with her mum anyway and becomes a prostitute on the streets of Leicester. She would begin a relationship with a man and they would have 2 children, a boy and a girl. They would then move to Dublin and have another boy. This relationship wouldn't last, and it is said that the man then went back to England with like 1 or 2 of the children, so I'm not really sure. But I know that one boy remained with Lynn. She would meet another man and begin a relationship, but this one was violent. She left him and moved to a flat in Coolock. One night he tried to break into the flat and Lynn tried to escape by climbing out the balcony. She fell and broke her ankle. The man would come around to her and stab her 5 times with his scissors. While she was recovering in hospital, other prostitutes would visit her. One of them brought their pimp, John Cullen. Very quickly, him and Lynn started seeing each other. And very quickly after that, he told her that she would have to become a prostitute to make up for the earnings that he lost when, quote, one of his women ran away. What happened there was he found this other prostitute in bed with a man who wasn't paying. He went mental, obviously, and broke her arm. But there was more to it. So, this was obviously someone she liked. She wanted to be in a relationship with this man. And John Cullen then basically tried to sell her to him. It was kind of, well, then, oh, you want her that bad? Well, then you can give me money for her. And it was like £1,000 or something. It wasn't we're not talking small money. And the man was like, I don't have that money, and so there was a whole thing. But anyway, she obviously tried to run away. Hopefully she did. Dolores would then get a council flat in Ballymun, and essentially John just kind of moved in with her. So even though he's married with 3 kids, he essentially would spend the nights at hers, and then in the morning at 5 a.m. or whatever, go home. Obviously be the family man, see his kids off to school and stuff. And you have to wonder in that situation, his wife Judy, you have to wonder what she thought. She hardly thought oh, he works somewhere doing night shifts. She had to have known who he was, what he did, and was probably just happy that he was leaving her alone, if I'm being honest. We'll come to that. At first, Lynn would think that John was this great guy. While she was living in Coolock, a neighbour smashed her windows and tried to attack her son with a hurley. I don't know why. And she told John what happened. He told me to go upstairs and ask the fellow to pay for the window he had broken, and he walked up behind me with a hammer from my flat. When the fellow came out to the door, I asked him was he going to pay for my windows, and he said, no, why should I? As soon as he said that, John Cullen pushed me aside and struck him on the head with the hammer. He was bleeding very badly and I thought he would die. Cullen was holding him over the balcony for a while, and one of the neighbours said the police were coming and an ambulance arrived in a short time. She would later say how John Cullen was obsessed with Dolores. He was paranoid about her and told me he was going to kill her for getting him 3 years in prison and taking his kids away from him. He always said she should pay for it. On the 25th of April 1982, John Cullen would light firelighters and put them through the letterbox of Dolores' home. Luckily, her uncle had been out, and so he was arriving back at 2:30 in the morning and saw the fire in the hallway as he opened the door, and he managed to put it out. They would tell Gardaí what happened, but they mistakenly thought it was a different person that the family were obviously having troubles with. That person obviously denied it, but it was kind of just left at that then. However, Lynn would say, one night he came to my flat and told me he had been around to Dolores's place last night and had set a fire to it, but the fucking thing went out. It's amazing because for someone who is married, has a lover on the side, and then is having sex with whatever prostitutes he can scare into having sex with him, he was quite a jealous man if Lynn talked to someone. He arrived to her place in January 1982 one night with two guys there. Now, bear in mind, one of them is his brother's friend, so he knows them. And they're just sitting there talking to Lynn. Like, they're not doing anything. Do you know what I mean? But that man, the one who is his brother's friend, would later testify. When Cullen came in, I saluted him. I don't know if he answered me. I did not take much notice of him. Suddenly I saw stars and everything went red. I was staggering towards John Cullen when I saw him lunging towards me with a knife in his hand. He stabbed me with the knife under my right arm. After a few seconds, everything came into focus again, and I saw Lynn Madden lying at the kitchen door. The upper part of her body was out in the hallway, and John Cullen was bent over her, trying to stab her with the knife, but she was trying to hold him back with her legs, kicking him away. I got up off the floor and tried to get Cullen off Lynn, and she got away. I saw her run down the hall. Cullen attacked me with the knife and kept slashing at me. Most of the time he was slashing me on the arms and head. He would manage to get himself into a room and close the door, and Cullen would be trying to knock it down. After a few minutes, it was quiet, and so he opened the door to check if Cullen was gone. The next thing I saw was John Cullen coming from the kitchen with two knives in his hand, one of them a bread knife. He attacked me with the two knives. I was lying against the wall helpless. I collapsed on the ground and he kept slashing down at me with the knives. All I could hear was him shouting, "He's dead, I'll fucking kill him." I crawled back into the toilet and I was lying on the floor. I was losing an awful lot of blood. I had my head against the door and Cullen kept trying to get in. Eventually, John Cullen would be pulled away from the door. He would then flee the apartment, but he would be arrested and charged with assault. He would be released on bail. On Saturday the 15th of January 1983, John Cullen and Lynn Madden were in her flat in Ballymun. Her son was away at a Liverpool match. They would be watching videotapes until the early hours of the morning, when suddenly John Cullen would tell her to get dressed. Lynn was in her pyjamas, and so she said, "Where are we going?" And Cullen said, "Just shut your mouth and mind your own business. We're going on a message." So at this point, the attack that he had done on the guy in the Ballymun flat was coming up in the next while. And so Lynn thought at first that that's where they were going, to attack him or to do something to him. In fact, he would regularly sit outside this guy's house and Lynn's house, keeping them under surveillance. But as they headed into Dublin city centre, she realised where they were going. That night, 34-year-old Dolores was playing cards with her aunt, her mother, and a couple of other friends, and then they all retired to bed. John Cullen drove into the Liberties and parked on a road called St. Albans Road. They got out of the car and he went to the boot. He put some gloves on and took 2 bottles of petrol along with a hold-all bag that belonged to Lynn, and in it had items from her flat like a hammer, knives, and firelighters. When Lynn asked what's in the bag, he said, "Mind your own fucking business." They started walking down the street. It's early hours of the morning, so it's quiet. But a woman would start walking towards them, and Cullen panicked and pushed Lynn over to the wall and started kissing her. When the woman had passed them, they stopped and continued on with their mission. They went on to Clarence Mangan Road, and John Cullen started counting down the houses. Basically, this street backed on to Hammond Street, and so there was a little doorway or gateway into the back gardens of those houses. Here, he would tell Lynn to stand guard, and he said, quote, "Right, now listen, I'm going over the wall here. Watch the lights in the house. If the lights come on, whistle. Watch the road for cars. If you see a police car and it comes on top, get a taxi home." He then handed her a £20 note. And she said, "But John, I can't whistle." "Well then shout, but don't shout my fucking name." He made his way in and climbed over the wall of the garden. Lynn had the hold-all bag, and so he would come back and take some of the items and go back in. Lynn would say, quote, After a few minutes, he came back again and told me the back window was open and he didn't have to force it. He put the hammer in the bag and took 2 plastic containers full of petrol from the bag. There were 2 firelighters taped to both of these containers, and there were matches with red tops stuck in the firelighters. He told Lynn to come into the garden with him, and so she watched. And so he lit the matches and placed them inside the window. He then closed the window and they left. Lynn would say, quote, "When I got out onto Clarence Mangan Road, I heard a woman screaming and the sound of glass breaking." She would later tell someone that that was Dolores Lynch saying, "Get my mother out." Neighbours quickly became alerted to the fire and all gathered to try help. 2 men would climb up onto the kitchen extension, and here they could see Dolores trying to get out the window. They found it difficult to get a grab of her, but they did, and they managed to get her out the window. She kept saying, "Don't let my mother die, get my mother out, don't let me die." She would be brought to St. James's Hospital. She had 1st and 2nd degree burns to 70% of her body, but she was awake and she was talking. After the fire was put under control, the house was completely gutted. Firemen went in and they would find her mum, 61-year-old Kathleen, kneeling down in her bedroom between the 2 beds with a blanket covering her. Her aunt, Hannah, who was either 64 or 67, was sitting behind the door. They had burns to 90% of their bodies. Dolores would ask about her mum and her aunt, and although no one told her the awful news, she would say that she knew because they hadn't been brought in. She was then moved to Dr. Stephen's Hospital, and here the priest would give her her last rites. Her aunt and uncle would come to visit her, and she would say, "My mummy's dead." And the uncle would actually try to say, "No, we saw, we saw them in St. James's." And she was like, no, my mummy is dead. Dolores Lynch would die hours later. On a wall at St. James's Hospital, graffiti read, "Dolores Lynch is a rat." Lynn would say that on the way back to Ballymun, John Cullen was so happy, and that he would joke, "I hope it was the right house." But he quickly got to work with getting rid of the evidence. On the way back to Ballymun, they drove through Phibsborough and he would throw his gloves out the window. When he got back to the flat, he would lie newspaper out on the ground and strip and put his clothes here. He would then put these in the rubbish chute down the hall, and then he would have a bath. I read where Lynn would say how in the coming days he would obviously want to have sex, and that she would ask and say, "Please, not yet, I just, the way I am, how I feel and stuff." And that he said, he was very nice about it, of course, we'll take your time and stuff like that. I should also point out that he also at some point had told her that they should have a baby and essentially forced her to take her contraceptive, I think it was the implant she had, take it out. And then when she got pregnant, he disappeared. So she went on to have an abortion. But yeah, John Cullen would wait. At 5 a.m, like clockwork, he would return to his wife in Kilbarrack. Lynn was not coping well. Bear in mind, this was her friend who this was done to. So she was just sleeping. She took Valium. And then it was only the next day she put on the news to see the 6 o'clock news to see if it had been reported. The first thing I heard was about a judge getting shot in the north. The second was about a house fire in Dublin where 2 elderly women died and the 34-year-old daughter died later. I think it was Charles Mitchell who read the news, and he said, "Miss Dolores Lynch." I knew immediately it was a friend of mine that John Cullen had killed. A while after this, he would arrive at the flat, take off his shoes and get into bed and say, quote, "I'm glad I got the right house. I'm just glad she's dead." Later that night, John then obviously got paranoid because the rubbish wasn't going to be collected till a couple of days. So he made Lynn go down and get the bundle of clothes from the rubbish chute, and then they drove out to Portrane. We drove out to Portrane and he was low on petrol and he got £5 worth of petrol there. We drove up to the cliff top by the house where the car park is. There was a car parked there with a couple in it. We sat in the car for a while and they drove off. We both got out of the car and he asked me to give him the plastic bag of clothes. The jumper was old and he tore it up easily. He asked me to give him the knife which he had brought out in the car, and he cut up the jeans with that. He then walked down over the rocks and I followed him until the heel of my shoe got caught in the rock and he told me to stay there. I walked back towards the top of the cliff. As I was waiting, he came up behind me and I thought he was going to push me over. He took what was left in the plastic bag and went back down again. He returned a few minutes later and we returned to Ballymun. When we reached the Knackers camp at the top of Coolock Lane, which he had turned off to Swords Road to do, I threw the plastic hold-all bag out the window near the camp. A few days later, they would go to visit Lynn's daughter who lived in Belfast, and on the way there, they would get rid of the car seat covers. So it didn't take long before people kind of knew who was responsible. One of the reasons being was John was essentially hinting to everyone that it was him. The following week, on Saturday the 22nd of January, he went down to the Grand Canal and took one of the prostitutes. This was not one of his prostitutes, as far as I know. This was someone else's, they had a pimp. But when I say took, I mean, like, it was like, get in the car, you have to come. You had no choice. You might think like Lynn had a choice not to go with him, but he would have hurt or killed her. Same as this woman. You get in the car or he's going to hurt or kill you. We're going to call this woman Geraldine, and he would take her to her flat where he would violently rape her. He would also do other degrading acts such as urinating and defecating. When it kind of, comes out of what he'd done, Lynn says that she knows that he did do this because he kept asking her. He would also ask Geraldine who had started the collection. All the prostitutes essentially had done a collection to cover Dolores' funeral. And he would ask her who done the collection and would say, someone had an awful cheek. Maybe he thought she had started the collection and this was his revenge. But this man striked fear in everyone he knew, women and other men. When Lynn was in her flat, when two men would arrive, one of whom being Geraldine's pimp. And they arrive and they would say, other girls saw John taking her and they haven't been able to get in touch with her. And Lynn actually said, well, have you been over to her flat? And they said, no, sure, John could be there. And Lynn would say how brave of a man you are that you know she could be in danger in her flat, but you won't go and help her because he could still be there. So the three of them go over and they would find Geraldine there. Cullen wasn't there anymore. Lynn would go on to tell Geraldine what had happened and that John Cullen was responsible for the fire in Dolores' house. The investigation originally had begun as, it was an accident, they had a fire when they were playing cards and a stray spark or something must have started the fire. But quickly enough things weren't adding up. There was the previous attempt at the house. Where the fire had started was at the back where the stairs were, not in where the fire was. Plus the graffiti at James's hospital saying that Dolores was a rat. So it was upgraded then to an arson investigation. After the attack on Geraldine, she would say that Cullen kept going on about Dolores and said, quote, I'm glad she's dead. She deserves to be dead. Anyone who rats deserves to be dead. He would also tell her, if you want to get rid of someone, you don't shoot them because you can trace bullets. You don't stab them, you burn them. That way you burn all evidence as well. He said you don't use matches to start a fire because matches go out. So you light a fire lighter and hold it for a few minutes so it won't go out. Different Gardaí informants would come forward basically saying that John Cullen was responsible and that they should speak to Lane. And at dawn on the 26th of January, the armed Gardaí would raid John Cullen's house at Mount Olive Road in Kilbarrack. They would also raid Lynn's, and it says another prostitute, so I don't know, is that Geraldine? His wife Judy would answer the door, and as one of them read out the warrant to her, the rest went in looking for him. He was sitting on the bed putting his socks on. Lynn and John Cullen were kept in separate rooms when they got there. Quick enough, she would break. So Geraldine would actually come forward to the Gardaí on her own. And so once Lynn had heard that Geraldine was also willing to testify about all this, Lynn broke down then and would also tell the Gardaí what really happened. John Cullen was tougher to crack and they had to keep taking turns. He would essentially just be like, no, I was in bed, I had went to bed at midnight. Eventually got to the point where they had to tell him, listen, Lynn and Geraldine have talked. He would deny knowing Geraldine. They would read out Lynn Madden's statement to him, and he would say, quote, "That's all true. It couldn't be invented, there's too many facts. The only thing is I didn't tell that I could have burned the wrong house. I'll tell the whole truth now myself when I see her." And bizarrely enough, they put Lynn and Geraldine in the room with him. And they said, we've told him. Again, later, the Gardaí would say, "Is it true what the women said?" And he would say, quote, "More or less." He would then say, "What's the maximum sentence for malicious wounding?" One of the detectives, Gardaí Tom Mulligan, would say, "I don't know exactly. I'd take a bail for the malicious wounding if I thought I wouldn't get more than 2 years." When he was asked what he meant by this, he said, "Well, I'd take a bail for the fire." He would insist that he didn't mean to kill her, that he thought it'd get out, but said that he didn't think she should have got away with it. He was then charged with the murder of Dolores Lynch. A first trial failed to come to a unanimous verdict, but a second trial would find John Cullen guilty of the murder of Dolores Lynch, and he was sentenced to life in prison. So it's interesting, they only obviously charged him with that one, and I know they can do that sometimes if they think it could fall through or something, then they have the other charge to charge him with. And for one murder or 3 murders here, it's the same, it's life imprisonment anyway, so maybe it was safer to try keep those ones just in case. Detective Superintendent John Courtney, who had led the investigation, he was the head of the murder squad. He would say, "There is no doubt about the motive for this calamitous crime. It was a result of a grudge engendered in the poisonous mind of a pimp who lived for a number of years off the immoral earnings of unfortunate girls of different creeds and nationalities. John Cullen brutally assaulted Dolores Lynch in 1976, and she, in the face of his evil intimidation, was brave enough to go to court and give evidence against him." Lynn would go on to write a book with the help of June Levine, called Lynn, A Story of Prostitution. She would actually go on also then to write another one called Lynn's Escape. It describes like that how she doesn't try to leave when he's doing what he's doing. Not once in that night had Lynn considered stopping him or running from Cullen. She had seen too much of his violence. She certainly could not have prevented what happened. As for running away, even if she had made it out of the garden without getting her skull caved in or a butcher's knife between the shoulder blade, where would she have run to? He had the keys to the flat. No matter when she would have gone home, he would have been there on the bed, smiling, waiting. Lynn basically had to go into protective custody. It's said that John had to be sent down to like Limerick prison because he was trying to intimidate and like buy off people, including Lynn. She had to have like round the clock escorts by Gardaí, and then eventually she had to move to England and she lives under like another identity. In April 1984, there's actually a video, I will share it with you, of a protest outside Limerick prison because prisoners from Mountjoy were moved down here, and so like the families and the wives and stuff were protesting, including Judy.
The picket lasted for 2 hours and went off peacefully, watched by large numbers of Gardaí and detectives. Armed troops manned the prison roof. 3 busloads came from Dublin, one of them organised by the Prisoners' Rights organisation. Mrs. Judy Cullen, wife of convicted murderer John Cullen, who broke a warder's jaw 3 weeks ago, complained that she had been denied visiting rights.
Well, as I said, I'm very concerned of his welfare. I don't know how he is. I've heard nothing. I mean, there's one girl got in to visit her husband, so why couldn't I? I believe he's not even taking his tablets.
Do you think, Mrs. Cullen, that part of the trouble could be that this agitation is going on because Limerick Jail is one of the few really tough prisons in the Republic?
As far as I'm concerned, there was no need for them to transfer him down here in the first place. They have a top security wing up in Mountjoy. Why didn't they put him up there?
Wives of the convicted men claimed their husbands had been beaten up and denied medical attention after slashing themselves with razors earlier in the week. They claimed an all-out hunger strike is now in progress.
She mentioned something about, like, I don't think he's taken his tablets, so I don't know what that's for. But it's also told that he, since being back in prison, he broke a warder's nose. Like, this is not a good man, and you're out here protesting him to have better circumstances. In May and September of 2008, John Cullen was allowed out with a prison escort to attend some hospital appointments. It is said that he has not impressed the parole board and he has never shown remorse for his crimes. For the other attack, remember, on the guy in the flat, that actually then went to trial in February of 1983, and he would have received 3 years for this. So he was already then in prison by the time his trial for Dolores Lynch came up. There's an article from February 2021 where John Cullen is suing the Irish Prison Service because of, well, he claims that they are responsible for him contracting TB. Now, apparently there are like TB outbreaks in the prisons or whatever. There were 35 cases between 2007 and 2016. He's the first one to actually try to sue. In 2014, John Cullen was photographed for the first time while he was out heading to, like, you know, one of his little workshops, the little training workshops, without an escort or something, and he was just walking along eating his little chocolate bar. I think articles came out with Lynn before the book had come out by McGill, and so Cullen had actually tried to like stop this from being published. He tried to get an injunction, which obviously failed. Guys, that is everything on today's case. It's a pretty heavy one, and it's he's just terrorized so many people for so long, and I'm glad he's still in. He hasn't been released yet. So, I mean, we could say now he's in his 60s, maybe he wouldn't be as much of a danger, but I think if that's your temperament and that's your mindset, then that's always going to be your temperament and mindset. So the best place for everybody is for him to just stay in there and rot. Yeah, we won't keep yammering on. So thank you as always for your support. If you have enjoyed the content, please be sure to like and subscribe and comment on this case and let me know what you think of it. Yeah, that's it. We shall see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.